I never believed in the idea that places could feel wrong. People, sure. Situations, definitely. But buildings, walls, hallways, I always thought fear needed a face. Something you could point to, something obvious. That belief didn't survive my sophomore year of college. I still remember the first night I moved into Hawthorne Hall. It was one of the oldest dorm buildings on campus, a tall brick structure that stood slightly apart from the newer residence halls. Most students avoided it if they could, not because of rumors or ghost stories, at least not officially, but because it was outdated. Narrow hallways, weak lighting, old elevators that groaned like they were tired of carrying students up and down for decades. I didn't mind any of that. Honestly, I was just grateful to get housing. The campus was overcrowded that year, and many students were stuck in temporary rooms or forced to commute. When I got the email confirming my dorm assignment, I felt lucky. That feeling didn't last long. My roommate's name was Ethan. He was a quiet guy, the kind who spoke only when necessary. He had messy dark hair, always wore headphones, and kept his side of the room unnervingly neat. Everything lined up, shoes parallel to the wall, desk cleared except for his laptop and a single notebook. It was like he didn't want to leave traces of himself behind. We weren't friends, but we were polite. That's how most college roommates start out anyway. The first few weeks were normal. Classes, late-night study sessions, cafeteria food that tasted the same no matter what it was supposed to be. The dorm was loud during the day and quiet at night, except for the occasional laughter or footsteps echoing through the hallways. It was the quiet that I noticed first. Hawthorne Hall didn't sound like other dorms at night. There was no constant background noise, no distant music, no muffled conversations bleeding through walls. When the lights went out, it was like the building itself held its breath. The first time I woke up in the middle of the night, I assumed it was stress. College had that effect on people. I checked my phone, 2:47 a.m. The room was dark, lit only by the faint orange glow from the streetlight outside our window. Ethan was asleep in his bed across the room, facing the wall. That's when I felt it. That uncomfortable sensation you get when someone is staring at you. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The human brain is good at inventing threats when it's half asleep. I told myself that over and over. Still, I didn't turn my back to the room again. The next morning I forgot about it, or maybe I chose to forget. Either way, life moved on, until it happened again. A week later, I woke up at almost the same time. 2:50 a.m. this time, the feeling was stronger, heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to scan the room. Nothing had changed. The door was closed, the window was locked. Ethan was still asleep, but the feeling didn't go away. It felt like the room was aware of me. I know how that sounds. I know it doesn't make sense. But in that moment, it was the only way I could describe it. The next day, I asked Ethan if he ever woke up in the middle of the night. He hesitated before answering. "Sometimes," he said. "Why? No reason," I replied, instantly regretting asking. He didn't push it, just put his headphones back on and turned away. After that, things started happening. Small things, easy to dismiss if you didn't think about them too much. Our door would be unlocked in the morning, even though I was sure I had locked it the night before. My desk chair would be slightly out of place when I came back from class, not moved far, just enough to notice. Once I found muddy footprints near the window. Hawthorne Hall was on the 4th floor. There was no fire escape outside our window. I cleaned them up and told myself someone had tracked in dirt during the day. The feeling of being watched became part of my routine. I'd wake up at night, heart racing, scanning the darkness. Every time there was nothing, no movement, no sound, except one night. It started with footsteps, slow, deliberate. Not running, not rushing, walking. I checked my phone. 3:02 a.m. The footsteps echoed from the hallway, growing closer to our door. I held my breath, listening. They stopped right outside our room. I waited for the door handle to move. It didn't. After what felt like several minutes, the footsteps continued down the hall and disappeared. The next morning, I asked Ethan if he heard anything last night. He stared at me for a long moment. "They stop outside our door every night," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. "You hear them too?" I asked. He nodded. "We didn't talk about it after that. That was a mistake." Over the next few nights, the footsteps became more frequent. Sometimes they stopped at our door. Sometimes they didn't. Once I heard breathing on the other side, slow, controlled. I told myself it was another student messing around. Or a security guard doing rounds, but security didn't breathe like that. Neither did students. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. The lights flickered softly, casting long shadows along the walls. The carpet was clean. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there. As I closed the door, I noticed something carved into the wood near the handle. 3 shallow lines. Like fingernail marks. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I went to the front desk and asked about Hawthorne Hall. The staff member smiled politely and told me it was one of the oldest buildings on campus. "Any issues?" she asked. I shook my head. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. How do you tell someone you think a building is watching you? That night, I stayed awake on purpose. Lights off, eyes open. At 2:48 a.m., the air in the room changed. It felt colder, thicker. The footsteps came again. They stopped at our door. This time the handle moved, slowly, carefully, like whoever was on the other side knew we were awake. Ethan sat up in his bed. I could hear him breathing fast. The handle twisted once, then stopped. Silence. Neither of us moved until morning. That was the night I realized something was wrong with Hawthorne Hall. And whatever it was, it knew exactly where we slept. The days after that night were the longest I'd ever experienced. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind brushing against the old dorm windows made my heart hammer. Even Ethan, who had always been stoic, couldn't ignore the tension. He kept to himself, moving around quietly, and I noticed him checking the door handle several times a night, his fingers lingering nervously on the cold metal. We stopped telling anyone about the strange events. Professors, friends, even security. Everyone seemed to have a casual disregard for the dorm's quirks. It was as if they had learned to live with Hawthorne Hall's subtle menace. But we couldn't. The feeling of being watched, once an occasional discomfort, was now omnipresent. It followed us from our rooms into the narrow hallways, into the shared bathrooms, into the small lounge where students congregated. We would glance at each other, silently acknowledging the invisible presence that lurked just beyond our perception. One Thursday night, around 2:35 a.m., I heard it again, the footsteps. Louder this time, almost deliberate in their rhythm. They weren't just pacing the hallway anymore. They were circling our door. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a student sneaking back to their room. No. The cadence was too methodical, too careful, like someone savoring the tension before striking. I clutched my blanket around me, my eyes glued to the door. Ethan's bed creaked slightly as he shifted, but he didn't speak. We didn't need to. Silence was the only shield we had. Then came the knocking. Slow, measured taps. 3 knocks, pause, then 2 more. No pattern I recognized, but the effect was electric. My pulse raced. I wanted to open the door, confront whoever, or whatever was outside, but instinct screamed at me to stay still. Stay quiet. The knocking continued, each tap reverberating through the door like it was drilling into my chest. Ethan whispered almost inaudibly, "It knows we're awake." Minutes or maybe hours passed. Time became meaningless. I tried to breathe slowly, to convince myself that rational thought could counteract fear. But when the final knock came, sharp and insistent, I realized something undeniable. The presence outside wasn't human. It was patient. It was intelligent. It was waiting. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The doorknob twisted slowly, barely moving at first, then with sudden force. My stomach dropped. Ethan froze beside me. A shadow fell across the gap under the door. I could see it stretching toward our feet, long and dark, and I knew with a certainty that I had never felt before that we were being hunted, observed, studied. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to run, to hide, but we were trapped. There was no escape, then silence, absolute silence. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. We didn't move. We just stared at the door, listening to the echoes of our own terrified breathing. Dawn came, spilling light into the room, and the world felt suddenly fragile. Our dorm, once a structure of bricks and mortar, had become a cage. The shadows retreated with the sunlight, but the dread remained. We decided to investigate, not security, not campus authorities. We needed answers ourselves. I spent hours reviewing the history of Hawthorne Hall, poring over campus archives and old yearbooks. What I found unsettled me more than anything I had experienced inside the building. Several students had left abruptly over the past decade, citing personal reasons, though none were ever fully explained. Security reports mentioned break-ins, pranks, and occasional disturbances, but nothing concrete. It was as if the dorm itself had a record of unspoken horrors, secrets buried beneath decades of routine college life. That night, armed with nothing but flashlights and a desperate sense of determination, Ethan and I decided to stay up and document everything. We set our phones on record, cameras on the desks, hoping to capture the inexplicable. Hours passed with little activity, just the hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of the building settling. Then, precisely at 3:02 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time, they weren't just outside the door, they moved within the room itself. We couldn't see anything in the darkness, but our devices recorded the faintest movements. Shadows stretching across walls, objects seeming to shift subtly in our peripheral vision, and the unmistakable sound of breathing that wasn't ours. I watched the footage the next morning in disbelief. A chair slightly angled toward our bed, a notebook moved an inch, a pen rolled across the desk, all captured without human intervention. We knew then that Hawthorne Hall wasn't just old, it was alive, and it was aware of us. Over the next few days, I noticed changes in Ethan. The stoic roommate I had come to tolerate was unraveling. He muttered to himself, drew strange symbols on scrap paper, and refused to sleep more than a few hours at a time. I tried to reason with him, suggesting we contact campus counseling, but he would shut me down every time. He had seen things, and I suspected they were worse than what I had seen. Something had attached itself to him, something that didn't leave his mind at night. The dorm's atmosphere began affecting me, too. I would wake to find my notes rearranged, messages on my whiteboard that I didn't write, and even my reflection in the mirror appearing distorted, like a second set of eyes stared back at me, eyes that weren't mine. At first, I thought sleep deprivation was getting to me, but Ethan corroborated the experiences. Whatever was tormenting us, it was shared, and it was growing stronger. Then came the letters, typed, unsigned, and slipped under our door. One word on each page, forming sentences that made my stomach knot. You should leave. We see everything. Do not trust the walls. It was impossible to trace their origin. No student, no staff, just paper. Fear had a new dimension now. It wasn't just being watched, it was being warned. But warning implied choice, and choice implied consequences if ignored. That night, we both stayed up again. We knew the footsteps would come, knew the knocks would follow. At 2:58 a.m., we heard them, slow and methodical, each step a countdown. The doorknob turned. Ethan grabbed my arm, and then the door creaked open on its own. Nothing was visible at first, just darkness, thick and heavy, stretching into the hallway. We called out, but only our voices answered. Then a shadow moved, impossibly fast, across the hallway and vanished. The cold sensation of 1,000 eyes pressed into our skin. I tried to rationalize, air currents, hallucination, but it was undeniable. Something had entered the room and retreated without leaving a trace. Our cameras captured it all, but the footage made no sense. Shadows bending at unnatural angles, light refracting in ways physics shouldn't allow. Something had crossed the threshold of our room, observed us, and left. No prints, no fingerprints, nothing, just the lingering sense of being exposed, violated, hunted. By the end of that week, both of us were barely functioning. Classes, meals, conversations, all seemed meaningless. The dorm itself had become an instrument of psychological torture. Every hallway, every corner, every room was a potential threat. We could no longer tell reality from perception. Fear was no longer an emotion. It was a state of being. Hawthorne Hall was not a dorm. It was a predator. The breaking point came one night when we discovered Ethan's notebook missing. It wasn't just any notebook. It contained sketches, notes, observations, documentation of everything we had experienced. I had left it on his desk, and now it was gone. We tore the room apart looking for it. Nothing. Not under the bed, not in the closet, not on the shelves. Nothing. And then we noticed something we hadn't before. The walls. They weren't just walls, they were a maze. Faint scratches, almost invisible in the dim light, crisscrossed every surface. Lines, symbols, arrows, some pointing toward the window, others toward the door. A path, perhaps, or instructions. But whose or what's? That was when Ethan whispered the words that still haunt me. We're not alone. We never have been. And it's been here longer than we have. By the time the third week rolled in, Ethan and I were running on sheer instinct. Sleep was no longer a necessity. It was a trap. Every moment we spent in Hawthorne Hall was tense, measured, calculated. We communicated in whispers and hand signals. The presence had grown bolder. It wasn't content with just watching anymore. It was interacting, moving objects, leaving signs, manipulating the environment to terrify us. But it never harmed us physically, at least not yet. The psychological torment was enough. We knew we couldn't last much longer. Something had to be done. We decided to leave cameras rolling in multiple angles, set up voice recorders, and even rig a motion sensor in our room. The goal was simple: capture definitive proof, evidence, something tangible. If we could just show anyone, we might regain some control. Maybe someone would believe us. That night, we didn't sleep. The clock ticked toward 3 a.m., the familiar threshold of terror. 2:59, 3 o'clock, 3:01. Then it began, the soft, deliberate footsteps. They approached our door slowly, dragging the air with them. But this time there was another sound, a low, almost imperceptible humming. At first, I thought it was the building settling, but it was synchronized with the footsteps, and it wasn't a sound of the building. It was a voice, faint but unmistakable, whispering, repeating our names. My name first, then Ethan's. I froze. So did Ethan. The doorknob turned slowly, deliberately. Our hearts pounded so hard it felt like it would burst through our chests. Shadows moved across the room, not along the walls, but through them. They weren't cast by anything in the room. They seemed alive, curling toward us, aware of our fear, feeding on it. And then the voice spoke clearly, in a tone that was both mocking and calm. You've seen too much. The air grew colder. Breathing became difficult. I could see my own exhalation clouding in front of my face. The shadows stretched taller, bending reality in ways I didn't think possible. Time warped. Every second felt like an eternity. Ethan grabbed my arm, shaking. His eyes wide, pupils dilated, and he whispered, "It's inside us now." I didn't understand what he meant until I saw it. Reflected in the cracked glass of the old window, there wasn't just one of me. There were two, and then four. And then countless versions of us, all staring back with expressions of pure terror, distorted in ways our own faces never could be. Each reflection moved independently, not mimicking, but creating its own sequence of fear. Then came the scratching. It started from the walls, faint at first, then growing louder, faster, scratching like fingernails over wood, metal, plaster. The noise was deafening. Ethan screamed. I screamed. The shadows lunged toward us, stretching, twisting, converging into a dark, viscous mass that oozed over the floor, walls, and ceiling. The room seemed to warp around it. Gravity changed. Sound distorted. Reality itself became fluid. And then it spoke again, more clearly than before. "You belong to the hall." I realized then what Ethan had meant. It wasn't just the building. Hawthorne Hall had a consciousness. It was old, ancient even. The energy of every student who had ever lived there, every scream, every whispered secret, had coalesced into a singular entity. And it had claimed us. Slowly over weeks, it had been drawing us in, studying us, breaking us down, and now it was ready to assimilate our minds, to consume our essence, to add us to its collection of lost souls. We tried to fight. Grabbed whatever we could, chairs, books, lamps, but they passed through the mass like water. Every strike was futile. Our phones, cameras, and recorders all died simultaneously, screens going black, batteries draining instantly. The shadows pulled at us, not physically, but mentally. Images of our worst fears, every regret, every memory twisted and shoved into our minds at lightning speed. The feeling was suffocating. Our identities began to blur. I couldn't tell where I ended and the fear began. Ethan's voice merged with mine in my head, indistinguishable, and then silence, complete, oppressive. Hours or maybe days passed, I don't know. When I came to, Ethan was gone. The room was empty, no furniture moved, no shadows, no air pressure, only the faint lingering sense of being observed. My cameras, notebooks, and personal belongings had all returned to their original positions. No sign that anything had happened, but I knew it had. I could feel it. Deep inside, I could feel the hall's gaze on me, always present, always waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat by the window, staring out into the campus. The new students walked by, unaware, laughing, texting, living normally. I felt detached from them, like I was outside the world entirely. The hall had marked me. I was no longer a student. I was a witness, a survivor, and perhaps in a way it wanted me to spread the warning or perhaps to lure others in. The next day I tried to find Ethan. Security, friends, even campus police had no record of him leaving the building. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. It was as if he had never existed. I scoured the archives again, desperate for any clue. That's when I found a pattern I had missed before, an old log of missing students spanning decades, all from Hawthorne Hall, all disappearing around the same time each year. Roommates, floor mates, individuals, groups. Names, dates, dorm numbers, and then scrawled in the margins of some pages, barely legible. The hall collects, it waits, it watches. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But as I packed my bag, a feeling I can only describe as awareness settled over me. Hawthorne Hall knew I was moving. It was aware of every step I took. As I reached the elevator, I could hear it again, the soft, almost inaudible footsteps, echoing through the shaft, growing closer. And then the whisper, unmistakable, "Don't go, you belong." I bolted. I ran, ignoring every protocol, every security checkpoint, every rule. I didn't stop until I was outside the building, gasping, shaking, drenched in sweat, and utterly alone. The sun was rising over the campus. Students were milling about, completely oblivious to the horrors contained within the old brick walls of Hawthorne Hall. I turned back once. The building stood silent, normal. Nothing seemed out of place. No sign of life, no sign of movement. Only the faint shadow in the upper windows, watching. I left campus the next day, packed up everything I could and never returned, but it didn't leave me, never did. Every dorm I've stayed in since, every building, every hallway, I feel it. I feel that same gaze, and I know now that Hawthorne Hall was only the beginning. There are places like it everywhere, waiting, watching, collecting, patient. Sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear it, the whisper, soft and deliberate, just beyond comprehension. You are never alone, we are always here. And that's the truth I live with, not a ghost. Not a spirit, not a prank. Something far older, far smarter, far crueler than any human mind could comprehend. It watches, it waits, and if you ever get the chance to stay in a dorm like Hawthorne Hall, remember this: sometimes the walls are listening. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, they'll decide that you belong.